Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of Big Think webinars for international school leaders, school groups and school owners. We're delighted you've joined us for what we hope will be a useful, informative and inspiring session that's all about thinking big about the future of international education. For those of you who have joined previous Big Thinks, you'll know the score by now, but if you're joining us for the first time today, my name is Susie Williams and I'm part of the International Schools team at Pearson, and I'll introduce you to today's speakers shortly. But before we get started, I'd just like to draw your attention to the chat, which I think most of you have already found, and the Q&A boxes. If you have any technical queries as we go along, please do pop those into the chat and we'll aim to resolve them for you. Please use the Q&A box to submit any questions that you have on today's topic. I know some of you have already done that in advance, so thanks for those questions. We will aim to get to as many of the questions as we can at the end of the session. Finally, to help you understand a little bit more about all of you here today, we've got a quick poll that will be appearing on your screens shortly. And in it, we'd like you to let us know, please, what sort of international school or group you're representing here today and what your role is. So I'll just give you 30 seconds or so to complete that if you wouldn't mind. That'd be lovely, thank you. Okay, has everybody managed to complete the poll? I don't know why I'm asking you a question, I can't hear any of you, but I hope you have. So yeah, let's have a look at the results of that poll. Okay, so 50% of you are joining from an international school offering a British curriculum. And then we have 6% offering a mix, so a mix of British IB and US. 11% of you joining from a school group and others, which I suspect include some Pearson people as well. So we've got a nice mix of audience. So we've got 22% principals or head of schools, 17% members of the senior leadership team, and curriculum coordinators and teaching teams making up the rest. You are all extremely welcome. I know that you're going to find today's session really inspiring. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce the speakers for today's webinar, who you will see at the top of your screen, Elizabeth Moore and Jessica Yarbro. Excuse me. Elizabeth is Vice President of Learning Research and Design at Pearson. Her work involves developing and applying evidence-based frameworks and resources to support employability and lifelong learning outcomes. She's passionate about integrating opportunities for learners to develop, practice and demonstrate personal and social and emotional capabilities to support their success in school, work and life. And Jessica Yarbro is a senior research scientist in skills research with the Pearson Learning Research and Design team. Jessica uses empirical studies and existing research to support the development of knowledge and skills frameworks within Pearson products. Welcome, Elizabeth and Jessica, and over to you.
Thank you, Susie. Welcome, everyone. So today we're going to speak a little bit about what makes learners employable, why understanding the future of work and skills is crucial. This topic is a big part of the work that Elizabeth and I do at Pearson, and we're just really excited to get to share some of our work and our studies with you all. So to get us started, and let me try to get my screen. Okay, there we go. To get us started, I want to have just another quick poll, let everyone get everyone to start thinking and give everyone a chance to get a little bit more involved. But basically, in January of 2020, PricewaterhouseCoopers conducted their annual CEO survey. And what percentage of those CEOs do you think expressed concern about the availability of key skills within their workforce? So we'll wait just a couple seconds for everyone's responses to come in. And once we have enough, we can probably post the poll. Okay, there we go. So most of you all said it was around 60 to 70% that we saw quite a spread. In this group of people, it was actually 75% of those CEOs, so almost 3/4. A lot of CEOs are expressing concern that their employees maybe aren't going to have the key skills that they need to be successful in their businesses or in their workforce. And one of the reasons why this might be the case is that CEOs are worried because of the changing world of work. So you may have seen headlines like the ones that are going to show up on the screen talking about this change. We're really seeing a lot more automation and advances in technology that have the potential to remove some jobs from the economy and really change the jobs that remain. Additionally, we've seen researchers and policymakers highlighting that, as we're seeing the advent of ever smarter machines, those soft or uniquely human skills are going to be really important. And this is what we're going to discuss today. So how can we help our learners be employable and have the skills that will help them succeed in the economy of the future? We're going to use the findings of an even more recent study to provide some context for our conversation. Specifically, we're going to look at the Future of Jobs Report 2020 that was put out by the World Economic Forum. I thought this was useful because the findings of this study reflect these ongoing changes and trends that we've been talking about for years, as well as the kind of acute disruption and changes we've seen within the past year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this study, they highlight the trends and events that are impacting the future of work. So in terms of more long-term trends, for years we've seen a rise in technology and globalization. And what this means is that we've seen an increasing demand for certain skills, particularly non-routine analytical jobs, as well as a decrease in demand for some other types of jobs, specifically more routine manual jobs. And a lot of that is really because the latter group of jobs can be automated. So we've, as those jobs have been, technology can conduct some pieces of those jobs, we've seen employers having less demand from them. And one of the challenges for educators is how to make sure that learners have the skills that are going to make them competitive for those more in-demand roles. Now, we've been talking about these changes for a while, and we've definitely seen some of the impacts, but in many cases, the changes have been pretty slow and not particularly drastic. But because of the COVID-19 pandemic, these shifts have really accelerated within the past year. And that's happened for a couple of reasons. One is that in efforts to slow the spread of the disease, we've seen a lot of restrictions that have caused office closing and the reduction in face-to-face work. In response, companies have had to digitalize their work processes as folks are working from home and can't gather face-to-face. In addition, we've seen even more automation, particularly as companies are having to cut costs or offset some of their expenses because of the disruption caused by COVID-19. Now, in the World Economic Forum report, they asked employers, taking into account all of these changes we've just discussed, what skills do employers anticipate rising in prominence and being more key for employability over the next 5 years? And then the top 10 skills that employers listed are displayed on the slide now. What first jumps out to me from this list is the emphasis on problem solving. So you'll see the term problem solving show up, but this is also indicated with the terms critical thinking, analysis, reasoning, analytical thinking. All of those are kind of the same cluster of skill. And indeed, in this survey, 60% of the companies anticipated increasing demand for critical thinking and problem solving skills, which I think is really telling because we already know the demand is high for those skills, but they think it's going to become even more in demand over the next 5 years. You also see a related but still distinct skill mentioned quite a few times that involves creativity. So you obviously see creativity, originality, ideation, innovation. All of these are also key aspects of effective problem solving. So because those two skill sets are emphasized so much on this list, that's where we're going to start discussing. So before Elizabeth speaks to how we can help learners develop their critical thinking skills, I want to speak just briefly about what critical thinking is and what it means. So you'll see I included two terms here, critical thinking and problem solving. And a lot of times they're used interchangeably to refer to very similar things or activities. At Pearson, we kind of use the term critical thinking more often, and we define it as gathering, interpreting, evaluating, or using information in a thoughtful, intentional, and critical way. We also break critical thinking down into 4 sub-skills that can also be thought of as steps to the critical thinking process. So first, there's the step of accumulating and interpreting information. You have to go out and find the information you need to do something, and then evaluate it to make sure it's appropriate for your needs, and also that your information is coming from accurate, reliable, and valid sources. Then you have to use the information to actually do something. And this could be creating the solution to a problem, making and justifying a decision, or developing an argument. We also kind of emphasize how critical thinking isn't a one and done process. The last two steps are critique and improve. So once we, even though we've engaged in a thoughtful process to create something, we still want to take a step back and see, okay, is it fit for purpose? Is it the most appropriate for this situation? What are the strengths and weaknesses? How can we improve it? So it's really useful to engage in these continuous and iterative cycles as you're engaging in critical thinking or problem solving. Then the last 3 bullet points describe actions that could demonstrate critical thinking. So suppose you are problem solving. Part of that process is before you even start the solution generation step, you need to really analyze, identify, and deeply understand whether you're solving the right problem. Additionally, you could gather key high-quality information that will enable data-driven decision-making. I know that's a skill that we at Pearson really want to encourage in our employees. And lastly, you could think about critical thinking being involved in critiquing and ultimately improving some plan of action or strategy. So I'll turn it over to Elizabeth now to speak to how we can support the development of critical thinking skills in learners.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everybody. Before I move into some of what I want to share, I thought I would love to hear from you in chat. If you think about the schools that you're leading and that you're on the leadership teams for, what are some activities or practices that you're already doing to support the development of critical thinking, right? What's happening on your campuses, in your classrooms, from your teachers that supports this development? I'm going to watch chat for just a second to see the kinds of things that's going on in the schools. And this could be, from an instructional leadership point of view, from a school-wide culture point of view, curriculum. Okay, here we go. Yeah. I see group work, a lot of problem-based learning, project-based learning. Okay. Independent working, good. All right, so let me I want to hear more about the teaching perspectives. Sorry, the chat's one way. I'm going to have Jessica show a few of, if you're not already doing this, maybe this will give you some ideas or inspiration, and talk a little bit more about what we've found, from sort of a almost school-wide practice place to really help support critical thinking development, right? And this is all for all learners, not just older learners. And we always like to make that point that critical thinking is not something that just starts in, secondary school. So a lot of the comments around project-based learning, I would just say, like, whatever your curriculum is, which you probably might already be very set, just look for those opportunities that encourage inquiry-based learning for assignments and activities across all subjects. So a lot of times we see these maybe just in science or maybe in some kind of, where someone's presenting some research, but it's really important that every teacher in every domain or subject area be encouraged to explore what could inquiry-based learning look like, right? So where is there an opportunity to investigate an open question or a problem, not something that has a predefined answer? How can students be using evidence-based reasoning and problem solving to reach a conclusion? And sort of almost school-wide, classroom, practice-wide, set those expectations that they'll be required to defend whatever it is they're presenting. Like, how did you reach your conclusion? Why did you end up, what's behind this presentation? A lot of great ways to complement an existing curriculum is if there aren't already small case studies, or I saw a lot of group work here, opportunities for group projects, research projects. If there's field work, usually in science, but maybe there's some other way to go out and do something, well, not right now because of COVID, outside of the clue, but making it authentic, relevant, real world, also very key here. And then from a teacher point of view, in the classroom, these instructional practices, we pulled out a few here. Definitely want to encourage and make sure your teachers feel supported in defining and discussing modeling higher order thinking skills directly with learners. So instead of assuming that learners know how to do critical thinking, take that scaffolding approach to a teacher thinking, right, oh, now if I were choosing this information, the first thing I'd ask myself is it reliable? Is it really answering the question I want it to answer in my research? Just that, think aloud, encourage teachers to model that will go a long way to giving students ways to think like, oh, I need to do that for myself, right? We also say teach higher order thinking skills in a way that's appropriate for the development. And Jessica and I put this one here because I think a lot of times younger learners get left out of the critical thinking development because there's sometimes an assumption that, oh, this starts in secondary school or you have to be older to develop these skills. But even just helping model how you distinguish between fact and opinion for extremely young learners starts to build that foundation of like that questioning mindset, right? Which is really what we want to do with that last one, right? Teach learners how to ask good questions when they're examining evidence and drawing conclusions, right? So what we want them to internalize having a questioning mindset, right? Is this reliable? Is it relevant? Is it similar or different to other information I've gathered? Those are the practices we want our teachers modeling so the students start to internalize them. Okay, Jessica, that was a long-winded slide.
Oh no, that's great information. So going on to the next skill, we can think of critical thinking as representing kind of the end of the problem-solving process. So you've gathered all the information, and critical thinking is really used to bring it all together into the solution or a decision. But at the beginning of the process is where you're more likely to utilize creativity and innovation. This involves idea generation and ideation. So when you're starting the problem-solving process, you need time to explore. You want to make sure all the possible ideas that you need to consider are out on the table and you're considering them. Creativity also involves divergent or unconventional thinking. So this could look like thinking about new uses for everyday objects or figuring out ways to combine ideas or concepts in new ways that you haven't thought of before. Creativity is also supported by bringing in diverse perspectives or ways of thinking. It's really easy to get into a set of routines or scripts for how you do your work or how you approach problems. And critical thinking helps to kind of shake you out of that and out of those habits. And then lastly, having a mindset where you can suspend judgment supports creativity and innovation. So it's really easy when we're doing problem solving or ideation or exploring something to latch on to one idea that we like and kind of fixate on that and not give the others the consideration that we need. But taking a step back and suspending judgment can really help you to not sort of lock yourself into a certain path early on. Okay, now I'll turn it over to Elizabeth to talk about supporting creativity.
Okay, so let's do this. I saw so many great ideas before in the chat. Let's do this a second time. What is happening in the classrooms on your campuses that, based on what Jessica just described, is really supporting the development of creativity in the learners? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and performance task. Yeah, okay. Oh, I like that one. Well, let's see. So here, similar to the critical thinking, I split this into sort of the curriculum opportunities at a curriculum level and then instructional practice. So at a curriculum level, really it's looking for those opportunities to explore novel problems, think flexibly, examine an issue for different perspectives, which I've seen a lot about perspectives in the chat, which is great to see, right? And it's across all subjects. There's sometimes a tendency to think that creativity sits with art or with music or with theater or with drama, but it's really connected to critical thinking too. So it's there should be opportunities to explore problem solving, how you approach a problem, ideation in every subject. In the classroom, it's really, I think, first of all, establishing almost a culture of the innovation and exploration are prioritized, they're valued, and learners can feel free to make mistakes or have a bad idea without any kind of fear that they're going to be ridiculed or punished or graded down, right? Like it's that safe place you don't have divergent thinking without feeling safe about throwing out some crazy idea. So it's as much the classroom culture and environment as it is the opportunities to have, these creative thinking opportunities. And then Jessica touched on this, but literally teaching strategies for divergent thinking is a great way to promote creative thinking. So when I was teaching for many, many years, we just did brainstorming. And I thought that was great. And brainstorming is great. But as design thinking and the approaches to design thinking have sort of become their whole industry, there's a whole lot of very specific strategies that are great for teachers to deploy that are so like move a little bit beyond brainstorm, make a list, right? So things like there's reverse brainstorming. There's, I'm just throwing out a few, you can Google these, right? Design thinking and ideation will give you all kinds of tips. There's something called mashup, which is one of my favorites, where you sort of take two different categories and you mash them up and then you try and think of what idea came out of that. But all of these are really, like Jessica was saying, like, strategies to move beyond the sort of one set of ideas, right? You want divergent as much as possible. And this is that second set on the slide, right? Instead of just saying like, oh, that was really creative, the other way you can promote development of creative thinking is to give teachers that support to give feedback very specifically on creativity, right? How many of the ideas that students brainstormed or ideated on, were there a lot of them, right? Were there like a whole list of them? That's the fluency. Were they sort of different in nature, right? Were there different different ways of approaching that problem, right? Do you see that? Were they original? Is there detail to them? So like with all feedback, having it not be generic, but having it be specific is another thing that has the power to really help students think like, oh, I am being creative, and creativity is not just this big bucket of things I can do. They're actually specific strategies. All right, now I'm going to go back and read the chat some more, see what people are putting.
Yeah, those good ideas coming in. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to get there we go, slides advancing. So we're going to speak to just a few other skills that we think the findings of this report point to as being really important. So there was also a section of this report that looked at the planned adaptations that employers have to COVID-19. And they found that a lot of employers plan to accelerate the digitalization of work processes, so using digital tools or video conferencing more often. We also found that they also found that employers anticipated offering more remote opportunities for remote work to their employees. So these just underscore the importance of developing communication and collaboration skills for our learners, but particularly communicating and collaborating in virtual environments. So I want to speak to you a little bit about what collaboration involves, and then how we can kind of think about those skills with a virtual lens. So one aspect of collaboration is engaging with other ideas. So thinking through how do we share our perspectives, negotiate and work through differences and perspectives to ultimately build consensus. And one of the things about working collaboratively online or virtually is that some of those collaborative activities, particularly where we try to engage with ideas in a really creative way, like what Elizabeth was saying with design thinking, can be really tough to do virtually, or at least tougher to do virtually than in person. Additionally, we find that it's oftentimes easier to resolve conflict or work through differences when you have kind of immediate access to that person in person. So we have to be thoughtful and really think through how we can adapt our strategies for collaboration, particularly for the activities that really benefit from in-person work. Another part of collaboration is managing the actual tasks or work of the group. So how do we coordinate our actions together so we work efficiently and effectively? And when we're doing that online, virtual teams have fewer opportunities to spontaneously interact and coordinate work. So it can be particularly important to provide really clear channels and expectations for how we're going to communicate and coordinate online. Then lastly, we have the communication part of collaboration. How do we share our ideas with others in a positive and effective way so that we're understood and we can achieve our goal? When we're communicating online, there's an even greater need to be mindful about our audience and the context and purpose of our communication. There's so many more ways to communicate virtually, so we really need to be mindful about what channel is going to be best for a given situation. And then it can sometimes be a challenge for virtual teams to develop trust and cohesion. So researchers have found that scheduling time for personal and social conversations can be important for virtual teams. So when we think about how we can support the development of virtual communication and collaboration skills, from more of a curriculum perspective, it's important to infuse opportunities for meaningful group work. And we found that the more interdependent the tasks are, to where the work of one student really depends on the work of another, that's can just provide some richer opportunities for collaboration. Also, when learners really have to negotiate ideas, that can be really meaningful group work opportunities. It's also important to identify and label for learners that collaboration and communication are skills that are important to be learned. I think a lot of times students can just kind of check out and assume that group work is something that they just have to get through. But it can be helpful when we communicate to them that, no, that's something you're going to need to do in the future. Those are important skills, and just kind of labeling that for them. Building on that, especially when we kind of think about it virtually, it can be good to make explicit connections between the virtual collaboration learners are doing now, which we know a lot of learners are doing because a lot of learning has shifted virtually because of COVID-19. So make connections between that and those strategies and what they're learning there and what they're ultimately going to be expected to do in an increasingly virtual workplace. It can also be useful for teachers who are teaching virtually to model effective virtual collaboration. So talking through how they choose which channel they want to do certain work, just kind of giving students access to that decision making. We have a couple more skills that were highlighted by this report that we'll address briefly. So one are skills that promote resilience and well-being. We found that, or in that study, they found that resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility was a top skill for 2025. And then they also saw that employed individuals are increasingly interested in training related to relevant skills. So mindfulness, meditation, gratitude, and kindness. So both employers and employees kind of recognize this as skills that they need to have. When it comes to promoting it in the classroom, one good strategy is to model a growth mindset, particularly around mistakes. So a growth mindset is essentially where when you experience frustration or a mistake, you view it more as a learning opportunity, something that will help you be more successful in the future, rather than sort of internalizing it and think that it means that you somehow lack the fundamental capacity to do something. So when teachers are teaching and they experience a mistake, they can kind of talk through how they use that mistake to learn and to do better and kind of shift to that problem-solving mindset that's going to promote resilience. It can also be important to validate learners' emotional experiences and just recognize that learners don't kind of come to school as a blank slate. They've got their own lives and stresses and emotions that are going on, some of which are related to school maybe, but some of which are completely separate. And it can just be important that learners know that that's valid and that's okay, and that's communicated to them through the course of school. And then lastly, there's a lot of basic emotion regulation strategies that can be taught, things like deep breathing, meditation, mindfulness, as well as strategies for kind of noticing thoughts that promote unhelpful emotions and challenging them. I think there's a lot of resources online for that, especially in the last year. And obviously, we're asking a lot of teachers to teach all the academic content as well as all these kind of softer skills. So maybe this looks like just pointing parents to these resources so that they can help do that in the home. And then to wrap us up, we want to do a little bit of a teaser for another session in a couple of months. So lastly, this study found that there's going to be an increased need for reskilling and upskilling in the future. Employers anticipate that a good percentage of the core skills that employees need are going to change in the next 5 years. And then in response to that, they expect that a lot of their employees are going to need to learn some new type of skill, which is what we mean by reskilling. Along those lines, they highlighted that active learning and learning strategy is going to be a key skill for the future. And essentially what this means is to help prepare our students in this area, we need to teach them how to be good learners, how to regulate or manage their own learning, not just as students, but even as they become employees in the future. This is a big topic that we've spent a lot of time thinking about, so too much to go into today, but we're going to explore this more in a future session, which I believe is scheduled for June 10th. This is a topic that we're really passionate about, so we're excited to share that with you all. And with that, we'll, I think, move to Q&A.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Elizabeth. That was very interesting. And yes, the big thing on the in June, we'll be focusing on this next session, so we'll send you all details of that. I'm going to start by asking you a couple of the questions that came in advance of the webinar, and then I've seen that there's one question come in on the Q&A, so if anybody else has got any questions that have occurred to them during the course of this webinar, do please pop them in there, and we've got about 10 minutes, so we should be able to get through a healthy dose of questions if you have them. But I'll kick off with a question from Hari Ram from the International School of Madrid, who asks, how do we equip children early in their development with project management skills, and how do they manage time and resources?
Yeah, thank you, Susie. So I will say that that's going to be a big thing we cover in that future session. But I'd say the biggest and most important strategy for supporting the development of those skills is to scaffold and model that process for learners, particularly younger learners. And that process is scaffolding and modeling is helpful for numerous ways. It helps learners recognize that planning both their time and their resources is something they need to do. This isn't something that learners maybe naturally realize. It also gives them a vocabulary and a way to think about the strategies one uses to plan or to project manage. And then it also, by seeing the instructor do it as they scaffold or model it, it gives them access to those specific behavioral strategies that they're going to use to manage their own time and resources in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. The next question that came in advance is from Mike Wickham, who's also of the International School of Madrid. So top marks to you guys for your questions. What are the soft and other skills secondary students need to have before entering further education?
Yep, I'll take that one. Well, I know this question came in before the session, so I hope the session answered that question partially, right? The critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, collaboration, communication. We also have, we think of the collection of skills around self-management, which Jessica was just speaking to a little bit, also as the kind of soft skills, right? Like, can you regulate emotions, progress monitoring, setting goals. I think those are all really important skills that we all need. And speaking for myself, still evolving and growing. There are also other soft skills that we haven't touched on yet that I think are also important around leadership and social responsibility, especially in this, even as raised awareness of, lots of things in terms of just social injustice and environment and, civic injustice, right? Inequalities out there, that just sort of being a socially responsible global citizen I would group that in something that is going to be valuable as you move into the work world.
Super.
Empathy,
Thanks.
I see. Thank you, Michael Wickman. Empathy. Yep, for sure.
Thanks, Elizabeth. A question coming in here from Simon Northcote. I fully subscribe to this concept, but how can we teach this if the exam system is geared towards old-fashioned recall?
It's a good one, Simon.
It is a good one.
Run for legislative office somewhere and change. No, I think and that's why Jessica and I went out of our way to include those sort of curriculum level opportunities, because the reality is for any school leader, you will be teaching a curriculum. You will be responsible for the how the students at your school do on exams. I think it's being intentional and creative in your own curriculum about where you weave in those opportunities. So there's always going to be what you need to teach, but and you do have to prepare students for exams. But I think the challenge is for any school leader, where do you find other ways to teach it that help develop these skills, and where it's not loopholes, but like where's that wiggle room in the curriculum to change something from a flat out recall assignment or drilling to group work, project work that still covers the goals of the curriculum, but allows a little more space for some of these skills.
Thank you. A question here from Marla Aurora. How will all this have an impact on learners with special education needs?
Jessica, do you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that a lot of these skills are still really important for learners who have special education needs. It may be taught in a slightly different way than it would be taught to other learners. But these are still the skills that they need to know and that are going to help them be successful. So I think it's just figuring out how to accommodate them based on their particular needs to do some of the things that we've highlighted, to work with others in a group well, or to think more deeply about something, or consider maybe more ideas than initially come to mind. So I think I think they are still really important, but that there are just going to be some accommodations and some adaptation for these learners.
Thank you.
I'll just add to that, what we've seen, what I've seen in the schools I've been in the U.S. and in India, some other places I've done school improvement work, is that opening up the curriculum for more of these open-ended learning opportunities, project-based, collaboration, group work, actually, is more inclusive for students of with special education needs, right? So it's not so much, do you know it or do you not know it, or did you get the answer right or wrong? So there's room to be more inclusive when you try and allow opportunities for some of the critical thinking or the creativity to happen in the group work.
Great, thank you. Leading on from that, Priyanka Modi has put into the chat that a suggestion that those children can be teamed with other kids in class to work together, which is obviously a great suggestion. Leading neatly on, Priyanka has also asked a question in the Q&A, so I'll come on to that one now. So engaging students digitally becomes very difficult when it comes to collaboration and communication. How can we work on it?
Yeah, I think certainly that's a challenge that I think a lot of teachers, but also folks in the workplace are struggling with this year, as we've all been online a lot more often. I think it can be useful to try to leverage all the different ways to collaborate. Because if you think about, if you're trying to engage learners online, you can do video calls, you can do chat, you can do email, you can do documents where you can be working in either synchronously or asynchronously. So I think just trying to draw on all of those and try to think through, okay, what am I trying to accomplish? What are the real goals with this activity? And then what's going to be the best for that? Is just chatting with the learners going to be sufficient, or do we really all need to be seeing each other face to face? I think there's just some additional planning and thought that goes into that selection.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got just under 90 seconds left, so this will be our last question. Apologies if we haven't made it to your question today. I know there were a few more advanced questions. We'll respond to those by email, but we'll just wrap it up with this last question. This is from Adnan Hashmi. Being a teacher, to choose the curriculum is not our job, and on instructional level, we're supposed to apply the best possible strategies in the classroom. What could be the possible basic outlines on instructional level to develop critical thinking?
I'll go first, Jessica, and then you wrap up. I mean, I think just that labeling what you're doing as critical thinking, right? Just taking a moment as the instructor to say, okay, this assignment asks us to do a research project. Now, the first part of this is gathering information, and that's actually the first part of setting up, for the critical thinking, like just the actual literal explicit labeling. And when you look at that information, I want you to ask questions. Is this from a reliable source? Is this information relevant to the question I'm trying to answer? That's step one. So scaffolding it, but really, thinking, really letting students know that they are engaging in critical thinking all the way through. Okay, now we're going to really interpret this. Now we're going to do this. Now we're going to evaluate what we've done. So that would be my answer. With Jessica, go.
I would just add quickly that any opportunity where you can give students choice or to make things more open-ended and give them the opportunity to explore, even if you have to bring it back down to some very specific instruction, but giving them that space to explore at the beginning is just a useful opportunity to leverage that would support critical thinking.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm sorry we don't have time to answer any more questions, but we're just coming up to time now. So I'd just like to say thank you, Elizabeth and Jessica, and to everyone who's joined us here today. Certificates of attendance and a link to the recording will be emailed to you tomorrow. I will just give a quick plug for the 5th webinar in the Big Think series, which takes place on Thursday, the 6th of May. Where we'll be asking, is British still best? And exploring why the British education system is the flagship route into university and onward onto careers. So registration for that webinar is now open on the Big Think webpage, so you know what to do. Please go and sign up for that. But before then, in April, we're hosting a follow-up session to our first Big Think on online schooling to introduce you to the Pearson online schooling services and help you expedite your plans in this area. So if you're interested in taking the next steps with online schooling, you won't want to miss it. So do look out for details of that launch webinar, which takes place on the 14th of April. So all that remains now is for me to say thank you very much for joining us. I do hope you can join us for the next Big Think and the online schooling webinar in the future. Thank you again to everybody. Thank you to our presenters, and have a great rest of the week.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.